So what are some of the misconceptions that people have with your role in Red Bull?
Well, I think a lot of people still have this image in their head of Red Bull being all about cliff jumping and doing some really extreme, dangerous stunts and so on. But most of the athletes that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis are actually from the more traditional sports like winter sports, football, motorsports, also track and field. So we really see athletes from all sports, and the majority of them are usually not risking their lives to perform.
So with that massive range of athletes that you're working with, are there any areas that in 2024, maybe in the last few years, and especially post-COVID, just given, I guess, many different areas that have affected sport as a whole, is there sort of some common challenges that you're finding? I know you're currently in Salzburg, and that's one of your high-performance centers around the world. What are some of the challenges you're finding with specifically the work that you're doing in mental performance with the athletes?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's quite a few new challenges that athletes are facing, and one that we get faced with a lot is the huge amount of travel that athletes have to do nowadays. Whenever they kind of hit the world stage, there might be a competition in South America one week, and then 2 weeks later they're performing in Asia somewhere, and then the next one is in Europe. So there's a lot of questions around travel, and then also jet lag, and just dealing with the added pressure that adds, and just sometimes being away from home for 6 months or more, and then only coming home for a few days before heading off again. So I think I feel like there's more and more interest in all of the sports nowadays, and it's obviously easier to broadcast for a lot of the sports as well. You can stream it on all these different platforms and so on, so that I feel like there's more competitions being put on, more events being put on, which just adds to more stress for the athletes. And I feel like that's quite a new phenomenon that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that even if I just take a micro example is cricket in the world of sport. I mean, it's not a micro sport, it's the second largest sport in the world, but it's in the professional setting, it is known that the schedule is just carnage, and it's actually causing a lot of issues for players, both physically, but also just the burnout, the continuous need to stay at high performance. And so what are you usually prescribing to athletes that are traveling all the time and then having to maintain a high level of performance?
Yeah, I mean, you can tackle that from many different perspectives, I guess, or different angles, because on the one hand, like looking at the macro scale, actually helping them, especially the ones in the kind of less popular sports, actually managing their race calendar or competition calendar together with them. So if it's in the preseason, actually sitting down and saying to them, right, show me what events you have lined up next year, and actually just talking them through, is that event there really necessary for your world ranking or for your sponsorships or anything? Or where are areas where you can maybe give yourself a 1 week or a 2 week break just to mentally recover as well? And that's possible for many athletes, which you might not think, but it's actually possible for them to create these breaks in the middle of their schedule. So they might always tend to kind of over plan the year and try to do everything and say yes to everything, because ultimately that's what led them to where they are now. But actually helping them to also create a bit of I always say, like, everyone working in an office environment or anything like that, they always get days off in the year. They always take a holiday, but when is your holiday? And they often look at you and say, well, I haven't taken one in 5 years. So just helping them a little bit with that. But then also more on the micro scale, okay, what little tools, what little tricks can you do while you're on the road, when you're sitting on the aeroplane, rather than watching 4 movies on a long haul flight? Can we actually get you to do just 20 minutes of mindfulness on that flight, or a breathing exercise or something like that, to give you a mini break, which if you do that regularly on a daily basis, and that you have that summative effect that ultimately lowers your overall stress level as well, right?
I guess there's a massive balance there, because sometimes you could see travel as the relaxation away from the sport. It's the period off, right? And you might worry about trying to place something that is related to the sport onto them, because then you're just almost never getting that switching off experience. So I think of, and this is not a sort of worldwide travel scenario that I was having, but if I was traveling to a game and things like that, and I sort of just did this without being taught how to do it, I would visualize the game that I had coming up. I would almost see the stadium that I was going to be at, and I would put myself in that experience before I'd got there. Now, was I technically switching off from the sport? No. But one thing that sort of relieved me was that I'd already been there, so that by the time I got to the ground, I wasn't playing catch up. I wasn't just trying to figure this thing out over and over again. And I think there's going to be a balance that you have to strike, isn't there, when you're doing these, whether it's a long haul flight, short haul flight, or just a drive, whatever it might be, in, okay, how can you be really effective in what you're actually doing? Is it helping or hindering you? Is you overthinking about the performance? Are you thinking about it in a negative way or a positive way? And so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also just, asking the athletes, what are some really short activities that you can do that give you energy rather than take energy? And it's quite interesting what different things the athletes can come up with. Like I had an athlete just the other week who said they used to do this like paint by numbers when they were a child, and they recently saw someone do it again, and they thought, oh, that would be fun to do that again. And I just encouraged him to just give that a try. And he said like that was actually amazing, because it grounded him. It just, it was just like meditating for him, and afterwards he just felt energized. So it's quite like, I think athletes are always really creative and finding ways to help themselves, and sometimes it's just giving them a helping hand to come up with the right solution for themselves.
You've got probably a ton of athletes that are really super motivated. So you mentioned mindfulness, breathing exercises. Are you tending to lean more towards the parasympathetic type interventions than trying to get any sort of drive, motivation, or really sympathetic type stuff into your athletes?
Yes and no. So the department here is called mental performance, because we really have this clear performance focus. We are here to help the athletes kind of achieve that extra 0.01% that everyone always talks about, right? So we're trying to just accelerate their performance ultimately. But often, you are right, often it is the opposite that helps them to be more capable to perform. So even though it's maybe a little bit contradicting and not really what the name suggests, but often we do spend a lot of time talking about just getting that life work balance or life sport balance, getting that in order, and helping the athletes to find ways to recover and basically just gather more energy again. So it's we do have a focus more on the performance enhancement aspect, but often you can't do that without talking about the opposite side as well.
Yeah, and I wonder how many, or even if you just have an anecdotal experience on the hunger for athletes to start to step through your door and to acknowledge this. What's that looking like? How many of your athletes at Redbull are really starting to focus on mental performance?
All of them. And it's for a lot of them, it's the first time that they come in touch with sports psychology or mental performance. Even though they, some of them have been world champions a number of times in their sport discipline, they still haven't had a chance to experience sports psychology or mental performance, and don't really know what to expect from it either. And very often I get this the situation where an athlete walks in and we have our first session together. We kind of have the semi-structured intake interview that me and my colleagues we go through, and then we kind of just take the conversation wherever it goes and talk about their challenges in their life and so on. And then quite often after the first hour or hour and a half, they kind of just take this deep breath and a sigh and just go, wow, that was really good. Because, they report like that was the first time in, they don't know how long, like months, years, that someone actually sat down and just listened to them and wanted to support them and help them without any kind of distractions, without any kind of political involvement in there or any bad interests or anything like that, but just, okay, we'll focus on you, tell me what you need, tell me what your challenges are, and let's talk about it. And it's kind of sad that that doesn't really exist as somewhere else in their life, but then it also makes us feel good that at least we can give them that space and the time to have it when they come and visit us.
How many of your athletes are, I don't know if you put a percentage on it, but in team sports compared to individual sports?
I would say the ones that are coming here, I would say probably about 80% are individual. And then the rest are from team sports like football, ice hockey, cricket. We also have a cricket team in the IPL, the Rajasthan Royals. But yeah, the majority of them are actually individual sport athletes.
Because that, for me, is quite interesting, whether there's a difference in potentially team versus individual athletes that then seek out the mental performance help, because an individual athlete, and especially if we link it with someone like Red Bull, right? If you think of an individual athlete that is potentially sponsored by Red Bull, that is Red Bull in itself is an advertising machine. There's sponsorships, there's just cameras, lights, action, right? It's that sort of world. And that comes with more people trying to get a piece of the pie of the individual standing in front of them, which could probably be a much more lonely experience and much more challenging in order to know sort of who is having that real conversation. Is there something behind this conversation that is got a hidden agenda? Yeah. And then whereas in a team sport, just again from my experience, is that you tend to do things through osmosis of the environment. So if one person is doing it, or if there's someone that you perhaps look up to, even in the event of a super toxic culture, if there's sort of one shining light within it that you can hang your hat on and go, that's someone I want to be like, you can at least start to feel like I can go and have those conversations, or this is a door that I can go through. So yeah, I wonder if the reason why a lot of the individual athletes aren't doing that is because of the nature of just the people that are around them. Also the fact that just being an individual athlete requires you being on your own a lot more in order to get your results, get to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched upon something else there that's really important in the work that we do, because obviously we work for Red Bull. It's the Red Bull Athlete Performance Center where I work. However, we are our own entity. We're completely separated from the headquarters and the people drafting the contracts and all of that. So one of the first things I tell the athletes when they start working with us is that, everything that we discuss here stays here. I'm not going to question you and then afterwards tell your manager that you're at risk of a burnout and we should cancel the contract. Like those conversations never ever happen. We're completely separated from that, which gives us that neutral ground where we are just here to work with the athlete and there's no other agenda or anything there. And that's also what I experience with the team sports athletes then, that, they might have a sports psychologist working in their club or in their team, but they're never quite sure, like, how close is that sports psych to my coach? And if I tell them now that I'm going through a hard time right now with my partner at home, then maybe my coach won't select me for the game. So we kind of give them that neutral talking ground as well, where it doesn't matter what you tell me, I'm just here to help you, and it's not going to have any effect on selection processes or contract renewal or anything like that. So it's quite a luxury to work like that, to be honest.
The sports psych guilt is a real thing. And I mean that in the sense of you feeling guilty for talking to a sports psych in a team because you are worried about that information getting back to a head coach. And I've felt that. I've 100% felt that. I probably didn't seek out help early enough when it came to the mental side of my game, sports psychology, because I was fearful that if I was seen to have been walking through that door, if information of me not being in the right place could really risk me not playing and getting dropped from the team, and that then leading to a cascade of negative effects that I could only start to overthink on, which would be losing my contract, just not being able to play as many games as I could. And so you kind of, especially in England, you take this stoic approach and you go, I'm going to bite my lip. I'm going to figure this out myself. Surely I can figure this out myself. And then now working with athletes, but also going through a therapeutic process myself, quite literally by the definition of doing the work on yourself, it has to be done with someone else. You can't do it on your own. It's kind of like saying in physiotherapy terms, or even in strength and conditioning, knowing how to lift weights the right way, get the right technique, or how to heal, prevent an injury that you have, you require someone else in that room. You don't have that knowledge, but for some reason, when it comes to the psychological part of our game, us as human beings, whether it's an evolutionary type thing, I don't know, but we believe that it's us who has to have the answers. And in order to heal, strengthen, it requires someone else.
Yeah. And I love to make those comparisons as well to the other fields of sports science and sports medicine, because it just kind of makes it so much clearer to athletes as well. Because I tell them, if you break your leg or if you have an ACL injury, you can't hide that. It's the doctor is going to find it, and you need to have surgery, or you need to treat it at least. But the problem is that with the mental aspect, you are able to hide a lot of it. There can be a lot of things going on inside of you, but for that 2-hour period where you're at training, you can do a pretty good job at hiding it. And then when you get home, you experience all those symptoms again, whatever it might be, right? So, but if you imagine it again as an injury, if you left that ACL injury untreated and you kept playing with it, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And until at some point, if you don't look after it, it might end your career. And if you draw that comparison into mental things again, if you leave some of those symptoms that you're experiencing untreated, eventually it might prevent you from ever playing again, or it might lead to really serious outcomes. So use the support that you have around you to tackle those topics, and know that the people who are working at your club are there to support you and help you. They're not there to find things that are wrong with you and kick you out of the team. So I don't know how many athletes are listening to this, but maybe if there are a few listening, then I just encourage them to, if you are experiencing some uncomfortable symptoms, then do try and speak to someone about it.
Do you have, I don't think I've asked this question on the show yet, do you have sort of a recommended dosage of mental performance coaching, psychological support for an athlete? Maybe that's too broad a question, but I think for people listening is, okay, if I know that I want to dive into working with a sports psych, mental performance coach, I don't know how often I should be doing it because I've never done it before. I also, how is it really going to help me in each session? But what would be sort of the recommended, I guess, starting dosage?
It's one of those questions where you get the beautiful answer of it depends.
Yeah.
Because of course it does depend on a lot of factors. It depends whether we're talking just about like, okay, I'm going through a bit of a performance slump and I want to get back to my previous performance, or if we're talking, serious mental health issues. But
I'll frame it a different way. That's the slightly different thing. There's another way I could frame this is through experience of athletes I know who have reached crisis point. So I've been contacted by athletes before where they go, everything's in the bin. Like, my mind's in the bin, my sport's in the bin, everything's just terrible. And you're like, okay. And then you start working with them and you speak to them and you develop where they're at, you understand. And then suddenly you start to see movement. And sure enough, you get a positive performance that comes out, and then you don't hear from them. They're gone. It's over. And then suddenly you see 3 months down the line, the season has not turned out probably how they want to. And then a message comes in saying, I need to talk to you. And how do we stop that from happening? Right? How does that whole journey stop from happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's important to be very clear with the expectations right from the start, because again, I like to draw the comparisons, but it's different if you go to a physiotherapist or if you go to a sports psychologist, because the physiotherapist will ask you what's wrong, then you lie down, they massage you, and then you get up and you feel better. And you don't really have to put that much work in yourself. Okay, maybe they give you some exercises that you have to do at home, but generally the physiotherapist will make you feel better once you get up. But with a sports psychologist, they'll ask you loads of questions and then they'll tell you to do something, but you've got to do the work. So it's almost like for every session that you have with a sports psychologist, and of course I can't put a number on this, but roughly I would say for every session you have with a sports psychologist, you need to invest like 4 or 5 times as much time independently on your own then to work through the things that you've spoken about, or to work through the skill or the technique that the psychologist has recommended to you. So, you know, you might have a 1 hour session and the outcome of that session is that you've been given a task to something around goal setting or something, or a task around self-talk, like start thinking about your own self-talk script and things like that. That's going to require a lot of work and a lot of effort from yourself, because the sports psychologist can guide you and help you in the right direction, but at the end of the day, you've got to do it yourself. And I think that's where a lot of work together between the sports psychologist and athlete breaks down, because the athlete kind of gets to a point where they realize like every time I go there, I've got loads of work to do and this is a lot and I don't see any direct outcomes straight away. And then that kind of like it comes to a point where maybe they stop asking for more sessions and so on. So I think right from the start, making that clear that when you come and work with me, that means you've committed to also working at home and working in your own time and working during training, during competitions. Like this is a big change that you might be going through, and that's going to take a lot of time. So don't give up after 3 months if you feel like you've put in a lot of work but you haven't really received much out of it yet. The outcomes haven't been that great, because it will take time, and hopefully after a year then you start to kind of receive the positive outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's so important for athletes to understand, even from just away from mental performance for a second, is that you doing the work and getting yourself better is only when you're not with the coaches, the people that are working with you, supporting you. If you want to have that high performance to stand out, no one you work with, right, has ever got to where they've got to by just doing what everyone else was doing when the coaches were around. It's that gap, is that extra bit of work that's done that you're willing to invest in yourself. And then coming back to mental performance, I think that's where people really get a misconception about what the work looks like, is that when you leave, you are actually then starting the work, because you've only had a tune-up, essentially. You've been guided, you've had the tune-up, bit of review on what you've done before, and then you go. And that, for me as an athlete, right, was where I made massive steps in my game, when I had that mentality that every time I was in front of a coach, regardless of what that coach was, it didn't even have to be my skill-based coach. It could have been my strength and conditioning coach, and then again my psych, right? But every time I went away, I knew that whatever I do then moving forward was where the work actually was being done, and the needle was being shifted. Because if I was to only just rely on what that time in front of the coach, that's not much time at all. In the time that an athlete gets to develop and improve, that's not that much time at all. And so I guess from a mental performance side of view, there's a big jump that probably still needs to be made in a lot of spaces, in understanding that if you are investing with someone who is trying to help you improve your mental performance. And if we assume that the world right now is a much more challenging place in order to mentally perform, not only on field, on track, but actually around us, there's never been more distractions, there's never been more chaos going on around us, that it actually requires an even stronger mind than it's required before. And so that investment needs time, it needs energy away from the sport. And I think getting people to understand that is a big challenge. And I would be really interested to know how you have perhaps taken athletes who have not necessarily invested in their mental performance, their training from a mental side, and then actually turn them to someone who really does want to do it. So yes, it's great for the people that are walking through the door that are intrinsically motivated to do it themselves, but what about the people that are not? Those that kind of know that it is for them. Have there been ever experiences where you've been able to kind of convert them over?
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of those athletes who are interested, a little bit skeptical maybe, but for sure, like you say, not intrinsically motivated enough to be ready to commit all that time. And they're also usually they're the same type of people who also then will tell you that they have absolutely no problems. Their mental side has always been their strong point. They're really resilient. They don't struggle at all on the field and everything, which is great if they have that self-perception. But then we use often technology to kind of bring sports psychology a little bit more to life, because we're in quite a, I guess, somewhat unique situation where the athletes leave their normal training environment to come into the performance center. So I don't see the alpine skier on the slope. I don't see the basketball player when they're playing in training and so on. I just see them here in this neutral environment in our center. But then we use different cognitive tests on the one hand, of course, to also measure things like their reaction time, their perceptual skills and so on, but also to observe their performance behaviors. So some of these tests are designed in a way that it's adaptive. So the better you are at the test, the more challenging it will get, to a point where at some point you can't physically do it anymore and you start to make mistakes, and then really observing how they start to react to those mistakes. And they're playing at the world stage and whatever, they're high professional athletes, and this test in reality should have very low meaning to them, right? Like the perceived meaning of it or the perceived importance of the test should be quite low. But then still on a test like that, when you see them like throwing their arms up in the air and swearing and hitting the table because they've made a mistake, then you can say to them, you've just told me that the mental side is your strength on the field and that you're very resilient, but we've just done this little test here and you've completely almost exploded when you made that mistake. So explain that to me. And they go, yeah, okay, maybe that does happen on the field as well sometimes. And okay, maybe I could work on that. And then so really almost like putting a mirror in front of them and saying that there is work to be done here. And that for a lot of them, that triggers a little bit of our motivation to say, okay, well, yeah, let's work on this then. Let's like teach me what you know, and maybe I can improve. It's because often it's something that they didn't think they could improve.
That's interesting. The misconception of what people believe their mindset is to actually what it is in reality. That's a very tough pill to swallow if it's not actually what you thought. And there's probably a lot of ego that hides many different things for that, especially for high performance athletes, because you got to have that. You got to have an ego in order to perform. It has to be there. It's just every high performing athlete I've met has an ego at some level. Obviously, some massive grandiose narcissists, all the way down to people who've just got a small ego, but it's there anyway because you've got to have that self-belief. But that idea of what the perception of what you actually are compared to what maybe people perceive you as, And actually, there's probably another thing is especially in team sports, is the perception of what a team thinks your personality, your mindset actually is, and then you falling into that personality when it's not actually you. So you falling into what the group think of your psychological makeup is compared to what you actually are, and you're moving away from your authentic self, and that probably causing a massive internal conflict for people.
And even worse, if it's not even your teammates, but the media, right? Just like you've done one thing at one point or something that was picked up by the media, and all of a sudden you're the bad guy in the sport because you've overreacted at one point or something, and then immediately you get kind of the stamp as like, okay, this is the aggressive athlete or the rude athlete or the whatever, right? So I think that's even worse because you have absolutely no control over that, because you can't even speak to all of the people that suddenly have this perception of you. If it's within your team, then there's still chances that, through the team captain or the coach, you can kind of change that perception a little bit. But I think it's so much worse, especially nowadays with social media. Like you do one little thing wrong and suddenly hundreds of thousands of people are talking about you as if you were literally the worst person on the planet.
Do you think that social media conversation has changed more towards the personal characteristics of the individual? Because my perception is that the past media was more critical of performance. Didn't mean media wasn't nasty or bad, but that was more about a specific performance. Whereas now it's kind of like do a bad thing or have a sort of mistake or failure on the field, and then dig up 10-year-old tweets and link them with being some form of fascist or some form of racist, or do you know what I mean? And be really extreme in the just aggressive nature on going towards the human being than actually just focusing on the performance. And that is the challenge I think athletes face now, is that criticism on them as a human being rather than just their performance, which makes it harder to break the two apart.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, nowadays there's no line anymore where the personal life of the athlete starts. It's just social media, and all the other platforms have kind of gone so far into the personal space of the athletes that it almost feels like they've got nowhere to hide, because if you don't post every day, then you lose your followers, which then might make you, I don't know, lose sponsorships and things like that, which is of course not what the athlete wants. But back in the day, like, okay, we're not that old, but I still remember watching sports on TV, and every now and then you had maybe like before a game or before a competition or something, you had this like 5-minute quick documentary about like the personal life of that athlete, where a camera team went there and filmed, where they, and that was super interesting, but it was nothing compared to what we have nowadays, where like everything is public now, right?
Do you see that, especially in the business that you're in, do you see that social media playing a big part of the psychological pressures and maybe even drives of the athletes? And how do you work with that?
Yeah, I've got to say, I think especially in the last 3-4 years, I've noticed that athletes are becoming a lot better at managing it, and really being a lot better at, I don't care at all what other people are writing about me on social media, because I think the perception of social media has changed from where it used to be this really cool thing that everyone wanted to be involved with. Now there's more like, okay, people are aware of the negative side of it, and a lot of athletes are really aware of that, and they're kind of just saying to me, yeah, you know what, I post something there like every day or every second day, but I don't care what people write about it and whatever, and I just do it. And like often they actually play around with it a little bit as well, where they almost kind of like post fake news about their life, like something that's not even true, something that they didn't actually do, and just to play around a little bit. And really interestingly, in some sports, social media has become a way of gaining a competition advantage somewhat as well. So just recently a triathlete was telling me that triathletes are now more and more using AI and other kind of technologies to fake their training numbers. And so instead of posting the session where they did like a 3-hour bike ride and they were pushing 280 watts, they actually use AI to change the picture so that it shows they were doing 310 watts or something, just to confuse the competitors and make them feel worried and stuff. So I mean, that's a whole new space that is being used. And also, you know, just creating fake videos of like, I mean, we've seen them before in soccer or in basketball, where you see an athlete like hitting the crossbar 3 times in a row or something. Some of those videos, you look at them and it's obviously fake, like it's done really badly, but some of them are done really well, and you think, wow, they're at the top of their game right now. They're amazing and they're so skilled, and just to confuse the competitors or worry the competitors and so on. So is that a new form of doping even? Like, I don't know, but it's a really interesting space.
Social media psychological warfare.
That's crazy, right?
I never have considered that you would. I mean, obviously, social media is the highlight reel. It is just the window. And like you said, I think athletes are becoming more aware of that. But I would probably say athletes at a certain age bracket, I'd probably say maturer, definitely post 25, 26. I do see young athletes still sort of really gripped by it and what it's bad for. But ironically, the knowledge and information around how bad social media is for you is only being spread by social media, the machine itself, which is quite ironic, isn't it? But I would have never considered that being something you could do, that you would just try to post something to make your athletes nervous but at the end of the day, like anything in sport, you get found out anyway. You just get found out. You're never going to run from it. You post those numbers, especially if they're numbers that you're not doing, then yeah, you're just going to come to the end of that at a very bad end.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that every athlete is doing it, but it's just, you know, it's an opportunity that has come about. And, you know, maybe also posting that you've just been in a wind tunnel somewhere to like improve on the equipment aspect of your sport or something. Like you could basically post anything, and it might not be true, but it might be true, and I don't know. So yeah, obviously it's not something that we want to encourage at all, but I think it's important just to be aware of it, because a lot of my athletes that I work with, they're not too concerned about what the general population is saying about them or the news sites or whatever, but it's more like, okay, what are my competitors doing? And if I see a video of my competitor landing this trick that I've been practicing for 3 years and I can't land it, and he's just posted a video doing it, like, okay, that does a lot in the athletes, right? Because yeah, you always want to be better than them, but then just being aware of like, okay, not everything that you see on there is 100% true. So
depends how you use the comparison, though. Depends how you see that comparison, whether you see it as a negative effect or a positive effect. You can see comparison, I'm not there yet, I haven't done it, or you can purely see it as inspiration and I'm driven towards trying to achieve that. I think that's a big gap, that when social media provides comparison to others on a massive scale, that people are creating a gap of opportunity where by watching it, people are actively giving you their secrets away via a public forum. And me as a younger kid would have just lapped that up. I was always trying to find through a dial-up internet connection sort of how I could train like the people that I wanted to be like. Whereas now on a daily basis, people are putting out what they're doing. You could really dial into their techniques, the way in which they're doing things, and just rip it apart, right? And it's just free information. But people choose to go, I can't do that. I'm nowhere near. Why bother if I can't even do that now? They've achieved it. and actually it's just free inspiration, free drive, and fuel for your fire right there.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of sports, because if we didn't push each other to, excellence, if you like, then what would be the point either? Like, okay, a lot of athletes are always saying they're doing, their motive for their sport is passion and self-development, and they just want to become the best version of themselves and so on. But without competition, they also wouldn't be doing it.
When does it become too much though? When does the next mountain that must be climbed in a much faster time, or I think we'd spoken just before we came onto the show that Nims Persia was either doing it or had done it. He'd done the 14 peaks before in his famous Netflix documentary, but now he was doing it without oxygen. And it's like, what's the next mountain after that, the next step? So yeah, how do we try to really make people happy with their successes without thinking that it's a never-ending journey to just higher and higher mountains?
There's a lot in that question. Let me start by saying that I think these people like Nims, and also a lot of the other people that are doing these kind of extreme projects, I think first of all we just have to kind of acknowledge that they probably think differently to most other people. They have, whether it's a different personality or just a different history or upbringing or something, but we shouldn't compare ourselves to them and say, well, why can't they just be happy with doing that one project and now just sit back and rest? Because that's just, they think about it differently, right? And I think the nice thing about it is that they have these really big dreams and visions of what they want to do. And I'm just always happy to say that Redbull is never the one to say, you should do this project. Okay, now you've done that, but that's not enough. Now you need to do the 14 peaks without oxygen. But if an athlete really has that dream, that aspiration, we're the ones who are trying to help them as much as possible to achieve those dreams. And sometimes that also includes saying that you're not ready for that now. You physically cannot do it, or you mentally cannot do it. Actually stopping them from doing something, but also working with them to find ways to maybe do it in the future. So one project that I was really involved in was with a stunt pilot, Dario Costa, who was the first person to actually fly a plane through a tunnel. And he approached Redbull with that dream to fly through a tunnel. And of course, the initial reaction is, what? No. But then he really wanted to do it. And what he likes to say, we did our homework. And for a whole year, we were just going through every little detail to help him achieve that performance. And whether that included looking at the aerodynamics, and there was an external company figuring out all the different forces and aerodynamics in the tunnel and all of that, making sure that we knew exactly what was going to happen. I spent a lot of time working with him on different cognitive skills, but then also just working with him through that fear almost and so on, but then also making sure that his body was prepared for it and all of that. So really just going through all the details to make sure, okay, is he finally ready to do it? And yes, he was. So he did it and he achieved it. But I'm going off a little bit here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that they have this internal drive to continuously keep pushing the barriers and always find the next level, I think you said it earlier, like the next mountain, like, okay, what's next for me? And I don't think we should ever try to take that away from them and tell them that it's not good for them and that they should just be happy with what they've done, because that's not what they want to hear. And then they'll just go and do it by themselves or with someone else or whatever. But what they need is just someone who can help them to be as prepared as possible for these really, big tasks.
Even with that instance of the flying through a tunnel, you mentioned you sort of brushed over some of the cognitive work that you'd done. I'm so curious as to know what some of that would actually look like, and even for people to understand what goes on with trying to get someone in a mentally good place to do that. Obviously, not divulging any personal information, things like that, but what are you essentially working with him on there? So he's trying to fly a plane through a tunnel. I'm assuming huge amounts of fears involved, but also massive amounts of detail in how to use the machine, things like that. So yeah, what are you working on cognitively there?
Trying to summarize a whole year in in a couple of minutes, but just to give you one example, we wanted to make him, first of all, feel as comfortable as possible in that environment. So what we did was we took a 360-degree video of just the tunnel, a car driving through the tunnel at the speed that he was going to fly through. And then he had this video that he could view in virtual reality. And he, like, leading up to the project in the last sort of 3-4 months before the project, almost every evening, he would just put on the headset and just fly through the tunnel over and over again. So in the end, he said, like, it felt like his living room, that tunnel. He knew every little inch of it. So that's one of the things. Another thing that we knew from the aerodynamics company was that, so he actually started in one tunnel, flew out. There was a little bit between the two tunnels, and then he flew into a second tunnel. And we knew that from entering the second tunnel, because of the air forces or whatever, I'm not an expert on that, we knew that the plane would actually want to go up as soon as he entered the second tunnel, and he would only have a few milliseconds. It was something like 120 milliseconds to react and push the plane down again. Otherwise, he would just hit the ceiling. So we started working on his reaction time there, to, first of all, just visual input, but then also to more tactile input, so just feeling it and then pushing down again. And we actually managed to show with the test that we have here that we managed to decrease his reaction time significantly there as well. And yeah, obviously I've spoken about this project a couple of times, also at conferences and so on, and then the academics always kind of push back and say, well, how do you know that any of what you did transferred into the tunnel? How and I said, well, this is what it's like to work in the applied field. I can't run this study with 120 participants and control for all the other factors. The short answer is we don't know for sure, but the feedback from him was that it helped him to at least feel more comfortable and feel like he'd done all the preparation that he needed to do in order to actually start that plane and even give it a try. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that you're actually here talking about a successful plan being executed rather than a giant flaming inferno that could have been the other end of it. So better to have that support than to not have it. And again, that qualitative feedback is just as important. You've touched on the VR there, so technology. Talk me through technologies that you're really interested in, that you're using, that you love for developing athletes' mental performance.
Yeah. There's obviously a huge market of new, advanced, innovative technologies, and everyone is trying to get into the sports space, not because there's a lot of money in sport. The money sits in military and so on, but sports, I think, is just this big advertising board, this big playground where you can showcase the technology, and then the general public also wants to use it. So I'm just saying that because it just means that as a sports organization, and I know this is also true for a lot of the soccer clubs and other sports, you always get approached by these technologies, and they want you to use their technology and claim that, this is now unlocking talent, whatever, right? So they're really trying to advertise it really well. But it's really important to, first of all, know where the current gap in your applied work is that you want to fill with technology. Because most of the work the work that has the biggest impact on an athlete is still that human connection. Just talking to the athlete, I always like to say, the most important technology I use are my ears, because that should never be lost. That listening to the athlete, and really engaging with the athlete and committing to the athlete and trying to help them. That should never be replaced by, oh, okay, you've got performance anxiety, no problem. Here, use this app that's where you play a game or something and you improve your reaction time and you're better. Like, okay, I'm completely exaggerating here, but we should never replace ourselves with technology. But we can use the technology to support some of the work that we're doing with the athletes. So I just gave the example there of the tunnel. And we could have just visualized the tunnel just by using his visualization, right? But we could use the video to actually support him with that visualization. But I still said, okay, watch the video and really try to feel as if you're flying through the tunnel, and then take the headset off and visualize it a couple more times without the video, to still not lose the skill that we know is impactful. That's just visualization. And then also, we use some reaction lights here where you can create different kind of cognitive training. You can create like dual task scenarios, task switching, reaction time, as simple as that, like different things. But also then just using that training to practice skills like a pre-performance routine, practicing skills like, how to react to a mistake. So if they can practice how to react to a mistake in a training like that, then there's a higher chance that they can also react to a mistake in that way when they're on the field. But it's using that technology to create the situation where they do make a mistake, where they are faced with that kind of emotion and cognition as well.
I think nothing really will beat experience either. So the actual playing your sport, and it's definitely for more track field based sports, ball sports, things like that. The flying through a tunnel, massively unique thing. Like you can't get too many reps of that in real life before you actually do the thing in real life. Whereas most sports, you will have played a sport, you'll have a game, you'll have a competition, an event. But again, even in Olympic sport, that's still not the same. So doing an Olympic final is a 1 in a 4 year cycle, right? So there is elements where you can't necessarily go off experience. So maybe technology has to fill that gap. And it's the balance of using it and then relying on it. So do we then risk getting people so dependent on technology that it actually robs them of the sort of humanistic experience that is sport when there is no technology around?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And it also then leads to the topic around data, doesn't it? Because there's more and more interest in data nowadays and big data, and we try and just quantify everything in sports. There are some performance directors or CEOs of clubs around the world who would love to just have a number for everything that their athletes do, and they would love to just have a number for psychology or mental performance and say, okay, this athlete is at a 6 right now, we need to get him up to an 8. And I think a lot of the technologies are kind of just kind of false advertising an opportunity to quantify mental performance when we know it's not as simple as that. And also, some wearables will give you now not just physical scores, but also kind of like a mental readiness score or something, just purely based on HRV or something like that. And that's just it's never going to show the full picture. And the best way to ask to find out if an athlete is ready to play is just to ask them, like, how do you feel today? There's numerous studies that show that measuring CK or measuring whatever other blood values or HRV, none of that is as accurate as the athlete's self-perception. So I love data as well. It's really great to create norm values and see where an athlete is compared to other athletes and so on. But it's really important to just be really careful with the interpretation and not interpret too much into it, but just use it as a little helping tool on the side to inform our decision making, I guess.
Yeah, your Garmin doesn't tell you the stress that you're feeling when someone cut you up in traffic and the frustration you're feeling, you can only get that through just talking to someone. I found the VR stuff really interesting because I actually have an athlete I work with, and he uses VR for football and seeing himself on the field. And I'd actually never experienced that. This sort of technology wasn't really in and around when I was playing, and I think how much that would have really been effective of me being able to actually not only do the visualization that I was doing, but actually just kind of feel like I'd been there before. And I have no doubt it would have improved, but I also think there's a sort of hierarchy and levels of sort of mental performance that you really need to get to. So a lot of people at the recreational level sometimes can sort of grab onto the advanced stuff. It's kind of like physical training. They might see an athlete they might watch a Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi do something insane on a football field, and while trying to replicate it to get sort of the motor skills and develop that, there's benefit. If it's not built on some foundation of general basic skill level, then it's building a house on cardboard rather than strong concrete foundations. And I think there's a similar thing that happens in mental performance, is that they see all of the athletes that are at the very, very top, that do have all the support, that do have the opportunity to sit down and individually work with someone because of the resources that are available to them. They can do that advanced stuff because they've got the support, they've got someone that can maybe draw it out of them. But at a lower level, all you need to be really focusing on is some real fundamentals that you could just work on and build in some almost habits that essentially would start to create a really strong foundation. So leading from that, are there any real strong foundations that you would find a young athlete could use to build a strong mental state in their sport?
Oh, you asked some tough questions. Lots of things. I think as a young athlete, it's a big challenge, but it's also really, really beneficial to understand your motives and to understand what is it that makes me get up and go to training. For example, if you're a cyclist, if you imagine, okay, it's 5 degrees outside, it's raining, or at least some uncomfortable drizzle or something, what makes you still get on your bike and do a 4-hour session pushing lots of watts? Is it because you have this long-term dream of at some point riding in the Tour de France? Or is it because actually you really enjoy that feeling of finishing the ride and getting off and feeling like you've self-developed, you've self-improved during that time? Or is it because maybe it's the money? Maybe you actually see that down the line you could become really rich by doing this sport. That is the motive of some athletes as well. Or is it because you're just doing it to please your parents because you think but to really understand what is your why? Like, why am I doing this? Because ultimately that's where a lot of the fuel will come from when the going gets tough. So to say, like, what those are the factors then that will help you to keep going. And a lot of the kind of younger athletes that I'm speaking to are not really aware of what their why is, and they're just kind of doing it because they're doing it, and they just kind of go through the motions, and year after year they're improving, but they've never actually kind of taken a step back and thought about, like, well, hang on, why am I actually doing this? Well, why am I committing most of my life to this? And then I think from that, it's also easier to develop an action plan. I like to call it an action plan rather than a goal-setting plan, because goal is like always, it has an end date and it finishes, but an action plan is, okay, one action to the next action to the next action. And if I know what my why is, then from that I can also derive my actions, and I can plan for, okay, my main focus for next year will be to improve my technique in my sport, and therefore, like, working backwards, and now need to take the steps to maybe find an extra technical coach and understand how I can improve my technique and so on. So, it's maybe a bit of a broad answer to your question, but not that specific. But I would always love to start there.
No, it's such a true thing, man. Like I think back to when I was 15 and just feeling a little bit lost in the sport because I'd had an injury. I was risking not playing in the sport ever again, just had been told I wouldn't play the sport again. And the thing that really got me out was my why. Now, whether I was just unique at that situation, that I'd kind of figured out that that's what I wanted, I was really driven by the actions that I would take, what that said about me as a person. And there's probably some deep-rooted therapeutic answer that needs to come out of that. But the idea was that I was building not on the outcomes. Yes, there was a goal. I wanted to turn pro. I could see myself signing that contract and getting the shirt, getting all the recognition for it. But I wanted more the recognition of the character that I was in the pursuit of those goals. So that why, that overarching why. And actually for me, I had this sort of dream of being a role model. That was the idea that I wanted to have. And I'm very fortunate that I've now created that reality for myself. I get kids that I can be a role model to, and I take huge responsibility and pride in that. But that was something that drove me, and it was never going to go away, right? It didn't matter on my performances. That was always there. So it's a very complicated question to answer for people in that are probably sitting there listening and watching whatever, but one that's so vital early on, especially if you get conflicted in the answer being, am I doing this because of someone else? Am I doing this because of what someone else wants me to do rather than what I want to do? It's one of Bronnie Ware's, it's her top 5 regret of the dying in her famous book, of that I lived a life of what other people expected of me rather than authentic to myself. And that is so true for athletes, that whatever sport you're going into, you need to be doing it authentically for you and not because anyone else wants you to or expects you to do it. Otherwise, when you are faced with setbacks, when you're faced with challenges, you won't go through them as easy because it's not necessarily yours. You don't believe in it. Yeah. So I love that answer.
Unfortunately, that's what happened to me. I was a semi-professional swimmer back in the day, and I just remember always, like, as a swimmer, you always have to train early in the mornings as well, before the pool opens for the public. So for many years, I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go training. And so many mornings, I didn't want to get up. And in the end, I only got up because I didn't want to let my mum down, who was the one who was also getting up with me to drive me to training. And I also didn't want to disappoint my coach, who was also there, sacrificing his time to train me and so on. So that kept me going for many years. And then the moment I changed the training group and I started swimming at the university, and I didn't have those kind of external pressures to get me to go to training, I just stopped going. Because the first time I had a training session that I thought, I'd rather not train today, I was able to not go because there were no consequences. No one was going to be disappointed or anything like that. And that's then ironically the moment when I got interested in sports psychology. So if I knew then what I know now, I probably could have found a way to work around it. But my motive was never right for so many years.
Yeah, I always find it funny. We try to build the qualities and characteristics in ourselves now that would have saved our younger self. For sure. I definitely feel like I'm doing that, and it sounds like you're potentially doing that. And sort of from that motives and the feeling of the expectation of other people, that coming back to social media, I think there's an element of it playing into the wrong hands or it having a negative effect on athletes, is that when you start to perhaps have some success and you start to post that success, or you start to put out a persona in the real world, then you feel an expectation to uphold that persona and that type of individual you are. And that can be both positive because it can kind of hold you accountable, it can keep you on track because that's what it was, but incredibly demanding that you feel you have to keep up this image of yourself and keep going there. And I say that because I feel that. I feel that there is not only a lot of good that I'm trying to do in the world and trying to put out some good information and some good vibes and positive vibes, but I can't deny that there is an inner feeling that I am held by the expectation to be a certain way in public and around people because of what I'm creating, and that is a huge pressure. Like, that is actually a stress that I've probably not acknowledged enough, and I think would definitely exist in professional athletes, that if you have set out to be a certain way, to do a certain thing, or you've almost publicly said it, yes, it's a great accountability piece and that it can keep you driven and motivated, but also it could hold you prisoner to the fact that you have to continuously uphold this high standard of yourself that is not really realistic for any human being. Because I think I'm a big follower of someone like Sam Harris, the meditation teacher and the neuroscientist, and you listen to him and he's the calmest person, but then when he describes himself as being angry and frustrated, you almost can't believe it, but that's the human experience that actually exists. And so you have to kind of give yourself a break. And I wonder if we sometimes create that rod for our own back when we're creating this image of ourselves, that ultimately we can't reach that and uphold that expectation.
Yes, but at the same time, I think we're definitely exaggerating that as well. I think athletes, when I talk to them, sometimes they completely overestimate the consequences of maybe skipping a competition, or like maybe, being off social media for 2 weeks. They think, oh my God, I'm going to lose all my followers. I think we're very quick to overestimate that. And we don't always have to uphold that image. We can kind of just be human for a lot of it as well. People will still respect you and admire the things that you've done before and everything. And it's actually something that should be encouraged. That quite often we just also feel like, hey, I'm also just human. I'm not perfect, and I'm not always the person that I'm showing to be.
Mm-hmm. This has been awesome to talk to you. Where do you currently see your work going? What's sort of on the horizon for you? Something that's exciting you currently?
Well, at the moment, for me personally, it's the field of cycling, because many listeners may have seen that since this year we now also have the cycling team that's competing in the Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, and so on. And that's going to take up a lot of my time in the near future. And I'm really excited to just understand the world of cycling a little bit more, and bring not just my philosophy into the sport, but also just generally introduce that sport to psychology and mental performance, because it's a sport where there's a lot of misconceptions about, these athletes that just have to be mentally strong. If you're not mentally strong enough, you won't make it in the sport. But there's not this idea of, okay, this is something that we can work on and train. I'm generalizing a bit. I know that there are some great people working in the sport already, but as a whole, it's not a sport that has received a lot of attention to that yet. And then looking more into kind of like the long-term future, I hope to just be a small part in that. I don't want to say normalizing. That's what a lot of people might say, normalizing sports psychology, but actually integrating sports psychology even more into the general field of performance enhancement and sports science, because something that we've managed to achieve here over many years is that mental performance here is now just a completely integrated part of the performance support that athletes are receiving. And it's not something where like you wait until there's an issue and then you see the mental performance expert. It's like, okay, you want to perform better, right, go and see the mental performance expert. It's just part of it's just as accepted as strength and conditioning or nutrition or anything else. And I just hope to kind of just spread that more and more around the world and get all the different federations and clubs to understand that sports psychology is not just having a psychologist on call in case one of your athletes starts to show symptoms of mental health issues, but sports psychology is a field that can make the athletes perform better. And that's maybe, where the biggest potential is as well. So
the Tour de France stuff is super interesting because most people will just think of it as the physical being the main driver. And I think Mark Cavendish in his documentary did a really good job of just opening up the emotional toll. And I think it was Victor Campenaerts who gave a really emotional interview post winning his first stage of the Tour de France, and just giving a massive glimpse into what actually it takes on an emotional level from these riders. Just more the fact that you are putting in all of this physical effort, and then sometimes you're not getting the result. You're in a field of just elite athletes, and that are all at the top of their game, and just the constant need to keep going day in, day out. I mean, there's many people that have heard. I actually had Nick Littlehales on the show almost years ago, who was Team Sky's sleep expert at the time, and just talking about from the moment these guys finish the ride, that they're just all about recovery, then to get to bed, then to do the next day, and sort of the complete cycle that's going on for that whole experience. But then to uphold that level of performance, and also just to have that constant comparison of everyone going on. You don't really consider that, because you kind of just look at them and go, there's these human machines that are just powering through. Then you put in the fact that they crash at insane speeds, get up, go. They've got to go to bed potentially with second-degree burns on them, and go again the next day and battle off maybe some broken bones, real damage. And yeah, there's so much going on, which is a really interesting psychological space for you to be getting into. So that is definitely an exciting one.
And you're touching on the topic of mental fatigue there, which is one that I've been speaking to a couple of experts about as well. Sam Makora, Chris Englert, like there are people now more and more trying to measure and positively intervene in terms of mental fatigue, because it is a known thing that if I have a lot of stress around me, but also if I've been, if my cognitive load has been very high for a long time, that doesn't only decrease my mental performance, but it also decreases my physical performance. And really trying to understand what is happening there, if it's just a reduction of effort because mentally I'm tired and I just don't think I can keep going, or if it actually has some sort of underlying mechanisms as well that physically reduces my capabilities. And I think that's a super interesting space, which is where cycling is the perfect playground, because they are physically obviously completely on the limit. But then is the difference between a Tadej Pogačar and someone who finishes 20th in the stage, is that maybe just that he is better equipped at dealing with mental fatigue rather than the physical fatigue. So I think it's really exciting. I think in 5 years or in 10 years, if we speak about the same topic, I'm confident that we'll have a different or a clearer answer to that.
That would be, you could even probably end up measuring something like that, because especially with the physical, I'd actually imagine more track cycling that is much more sort of confined, whereas Tour de France is there's obviously much more open environment experiences on the road, but on a track it's obviously very fixed. But because I think I read something, and again this is probably some sort of bro science study that was done, but it might have actually been real, was that the fact that people who are technically overthinkers could burn calories compared to those who weren't overthinkers, because of the cognitive processes that are going on, that it actually requires calories in order for your brain to work like that. And do you know what I mean? And it was, so there would be a definite physical toll on an athlete, and you would then could look at the athletes that are maybe highly anxious, overthinking, that might actually, or even, because I experienced this as someone who is working in sort of a digital space, that just constantly being on, constantly having to work, I feel like I haven't physically done loads throughout the day, but I could be completely drained. And I actually then go to the gym in the evenings, sometimes in the morning, and I can feel the differences in my workouts, especially when I'm going through a lot of lifting at the moment. So it's very numbers based. I can feel the difference in my reps. I'm very conscious, aware of those. And you can feel, okay, I've had a day where I've mentally loaded myself up, maybe been on a podcast, right? And I'm really engaged and you're really engaged in this conversation, that you are then fatiguing yourself. And to measure that as an athlete and to actually go, do you know what? We prescribe you boredom, just the art of doing nothing. Go and do that. And that's actually something I'm leaning into is, okay, how much can I start to get bored and really dive into my mindfulness practice through it being like a conscious relaxation process?
Yeah. You've said so many things there that I could comment on, because I mean, first of all, some of that you can measure, because if you use something like biofeedback and you just create stress, you can see that the heart rate goes up. You can see that if you use EMG as well, you can see that muscle tension goes up. And other parameters as well, like body temperature and skin conductance. So you can see that even if the person is sitting down, just by inducing stress, they will start to burn more energy because the heart rate is higher and the muscle tension is higher. So there is definitely ways to already show that to athletes, and it's to a lot of them, it's a really, really valuable experience to see that if I think about the competition 5 days before, and I think about it a lot, and I always think about it very intensely, then I'm already kind of burned out by the time I get to the competition. So that's one thing. And the other thing about the boredom you said there is, I love to do this exercise with athletes where I say, all right, you talk about stress and you talk about that you find it difficult to switch off and so on. Well, let's use some time now and let's just sit here for 1 minute without doing anything. Don't look at your phone. Don't kind of start to like play around with your watch, or just sit there for a minute. Oh, and they hate it because that minute feels so long and they don't know what to do with themselves. And even in just a minute, so many thoughts pop into their head that they're like, oh, wow, yeah, I need to think about that and I need to do that. So and I think we've completely lost the ability to do that. I think back in the day, I don't know how long ago, but I think people would often be faced with situations where they just don't do anything for a few minutes. They're just waiting for something, whatever. But nowadays, whenever we're faced with that situation, we take out our phone and we message someone, we check Instagram, we call someone, or we do something else. There's too much for us to do to actually do nothing. But well, I dare you to try it as well. Just
man, it's real. And I even just spoke to an academic who's been a former guest on the show, because I'm just launching my research at the moment into perfectionism and athlete behavior and coaches, perception of coaches. And just to get someone to fill out a survey is going to be a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
I gave it to a few friends of mine, and just to test out the buttons and everything was working, and unanimously was like, cool, that was long. I said, it's about 8 minutes. Right. It is like, you can't get past many studies without length is always going to be the problem. But then this academic, I'd spoken to them about potentially trying to get some participants on board. And she said, we're finding that increasingly harder to get participants for studies, to fill them out. And there is no doubt a correlation between there being some form of lack of boredom in people, and because you just know that they're going to be filling out an online study, and even if they're doing it on their phone, the chances that within 8 minutes a notification doesn't come through really low. So that doesn't then flick them over, or them just have a fleeting thought of, has anyone replied to me yet? Or what's happened on Instagram? What story have I missed? And yeah, I have, do you know what? I think it's why I really enjoy getting over to, say, Mediterranean countries, because I find that just the lifestyle over there where people just sit down and enjoy certain experiences. I was recently just come back from Lisbon, and I just enjoy that lifestyle, because it didn't mean I wasn't detracted from my work, but there is just some form of percentage change in the sort of mindful cultural behavior that is in those countries. Just two people walking past, seeing two people sitting having a coffee early in the morning, and whereas if you come through the south of the UK or London, you will undoubtedly see two people having a coffee, one of them on their phone or two of them on their phone. And yeah, that that from shifting it back to sport and performance, there is going to be something on that. And you could actually measure that biopsycho model and actually look at phone usage, because there's apps that will track that. The phone itself tracks what apps you've been on, so you could definitely see, right, which group of you have done nothing, which one of you have been constantly on, and that would be amazing study. So anyone out there, go for it.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Look, this has been awesome to get you on. I've loved chatting to you, and it's really, really exciting what you're doing, and also really insightful the fact that Redbull and the way your space has probably developed, and probably the misconceptions of even just Redbull athletes in the past. I mean, even from reaching out to you, I had this initial thought that we were going to be talking about jumping out of airplanes and skydiving and bungee jumping, all sorts, but actually there's so much more to it. And even there, just towards the end, talking about a sport like Tour de France, so exciting in the realms at which you are. But where is the best place for people to reach out to get to you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm not on Instagram or anything myself. I probably could have mentioned that as well. I only exist on LinkedIn, but I don't actually have an Instagram account or anything myself, which to many of the athletes is like, what? Like, how do you live? But practice what you preach. So I've decided never to go on Instagram.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're Peter Kloppel.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Yeah.
If you've enjoyed that episode with York, then you might enjoy more episodes of the podcast. And we put together a playlist for you to get started with if you're new to the show, or even if you've been a long-time listener. All you got to do is click right here. Go on,